When the Romans came for your ancestors, what did they find? Fields of gold and silver. Think again. They found people like you and me, ordinary folk going about their daily lives. For the Romans, the real treasure wasn't gold or jewels. It was the chance to take something that was yours and make it theirs. Your farm, even your life. Everything was fair game if it meant making the empire richer. You may have thought the Colosseum was just a place for entertainment, but think again. It was also a symbol of Roman power, a reminder that the state could control everything, even death. Want proof? Look at the lives of the gladiators. These warriors weren't celebrities. They were slaves or condemned criminals sentenced to death by the courts. Some were volunteers, desperate men who chose the arena over starvation. No matter who they were, all were owned by the state. And the state decided how and when they died. Was it brutal? Absolutely. But that's what made it so effective. Imagine you're in the audience, watching two gladiators fight to the death. What does this show you? Rome could snuff out a life in an instant, that no one was safe, that the empire's power knew no bounds, was a warning, a reminder that the mighty Roman state could crush anyone, anytime. So next time you hear someone praising Rome's greatness, remember, it wasn't just about marble buildings or aqueducts. It was also about one thing above all, total control. The Colosseum was just one tool in Rome's arsenal, a tool to remind everyone in the empire who was really in charge. Don't forget that the next time you hear the roar of the crowd. Today we bring you greetings from the Iron Gates. Behind me is the Colosseum, also known as the Flavian Amphitheater. Construction began in 70 AD, and it was completed in 80 AD. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site and the largest amphitheater ever built. Its purpose was entertainment. That might sound benign, but the entertainment was anything but. The Iron Gate creaked open, its groans swallowed by the sudden hush of thousands. From the dark tunnel, a man stumbled barefoot into the sunlight, stripped of armor, holding only a short blade. His skin was streaked with dust and sweat, his face hollow with dread. Across the sand, another gate lifted, and from its shadows came the sound of claws on stone. A lion emerged, its ribs showing beneath mangy fur, its yellow eyes fixed and hungry. This was no duel. It was an execution dressed as entertainment. In the first century of the empire, the amphitheater was no longer just a stage for man against man. It had become a place where the condemned were thrown against beasts, their deaths transformed into a ritual the Romans called damnatio ad bestias, which literally means to condemn to the beasts. Sometimes it was punishment, sometimes it was politics. Always it was theater. The condemned could be criminals, rebels, prisoners of war, or even slaves accused of defiance. To the crowd, they were not men anymore. They were offerings to hunger, both animal and human. The origins stretch back to the Republic when generals like Pompey discovered how powerful spectacle could be. One story goes that Pompey once filled an arena with beasts and men, orchestrating a display that blurred the line between sacrifice and pageant. The more elaborate the death, the more it elevated the man who staged it. Power was measured not only in armies and victories, but in how spectacularly one could orchestrate blood. But not all who faced the claws of the arena were condemned criminals. Some were trained specifically for this task, the bestiarii. They were fighters who battled lions, leopards, and bears before roaring audiences. They carried spears, nets, and whips, but more often than not, their weapons were as much for show as for survival. Reliefs carved in stone still preserve their terror. A man with a spear braced against a lunging lion, another entangled in the claws of a panther, yet another with net raised, caught in the final heartbeat before a beast struck. These carvings were not exaggerations. Archaeology tells the same story. In Roman Britain, a man's pelvis was unearthed, scarred by bite marks that matched the jaws of a great cat. His body had become a canvas of the spectacle, his death written in wounds. To heighten the drama, animals were starved before being unleashed. Their desperation sharpened every moment, prolonging the suspense as they circled their prey, drawing out the fear until the strike came. The crowd leaned forward, their breaths held. They were not watching nature. They were watching Rome, feeding terror like fuel. Hunger became a tool. Death became suspense. And the applause was the final judgment. For those condemned to the beasts, resistance was rare. Seneca, the philosopher. wrote of prisoners who killed themselves before the spectacle rather than endured death as entertainment. Their defiance was not of Rome's law, but of its theater. To die by one's own hand was the last act of control left in a world that had taken everything else. In the heart of Rome, the condemned were stripped not only of their lives, but of their dignity, turned into playthings of a merciless game. The emperors delighted in it. The crowds roared their approval, and in the echo of their cheers, the executioners heard the heartbeat of the empire. This is our channel. Thank you for watching. The water shimmered beneath the Roman sun, calm for a fleeting instant before the signal came. Drums thundered, horns blared. From opposite ends of an immense man-made basin, two fleets surged forward. Warships creaked, oars cut the surface in perfect rhythm, the air filled with the snap of sails, and the shouts of men who knew they would never leave alive. The crowd, seated not on riverbanks, but in stone tiers built to embrace the spectacle, roared, as if the empire itself had summoned an ocean into the heart of its city. This was the naumachia, the staged naval battle. But though it was staged, nothing about it was false. The ships were real, the weapons were sharp, the men on board were condemned criminals, forced into war they could not win. For the Roman people, it was proof that their empire could command not just men and beasts, but even the sea. Julius Caesar was the first to give the people this vision, in 46 BC. To celebrate his triumph, he ordered a lake dug near the Tiber. Into that water, he set fleets to reenact a legendary clash between Egyptians and Tyrians. It was not just a spectacle, it was a declaration. He had conquered foreign powers, and now he could conjure their wars on Roman soil. Thousands watched, knowing that for the men on those decks, every stroke of an oar was a step toward certain death. Augustus, his heir, turned this spectacle into an empire-sized performance. In 02 BC, he built a basin vast enough to hold 30 full warships, each manned by crews of the condemned. To fill it required an aqueduct, the Aqua Elsatina, dug for no other purpose than to feed this lake of death. When the fleets collided, the water erupted in chaos, catapults fired, arrows flew, and men fell screaming into the depths. Thousands perished while thousands more applauded. For Augustus, the message was simple. Rome could marshal even nature to serve its grandeur. Not even mountains could resist imperial ambition. In AD 52, Emperor Claudius drained Lake Fucine, a body of water carved into stone over centuries. Where villagers had once fished, ships now clashed. The condemned faced each other on decks, the voices rising together in a line etched forever into memory. Morituri te salutant, those who are about to die salute you. Whether the phrase was scripted or spoken in desperate truth, it captured the fatalism of men who fought not for victory, but to die before an emperor. By the time the Colosseum was dedicated under Titus, naval battles had become synonymous with imperial magnificence. Some historians suggest that during those inaugural games, the arena itself may have been flooded to stage miniature versions of maritime war. With reports that the Colosseum floor was engineered to hold water, a feat as much of engineering as of cruelty. Even under Trajan, decades later, the tradition endured with the Naumachia Vaticana, an enormous basin carved near Vatican Hill, where entire fleets of men condemned to death fought under the eyes of Rome. Each Naumachia was more than spectacle, it was a ritual of domination, a performance not of war, but of control. To the crowds, it was entertainment. To the emperors, it was propaganda made flesh and water. The empire showed it could conjure seas, summon fleets, and sacrifice lives all without leaving the city. No empire had ever displayed power in such form, not just through armies abroad, but through the ability to recreate conquest at home, choreographed for applause. The Naumachia blurred the line between history and theater, between myth and reality. In every stroke, in every drowning scream, Rome was rehearsing its own greatness. These were not wars. They were ceremonies of power, scripted by emperors, performed by the condemned, and sanctified by the cheers of thousands. And as the waters ran red, the crowd left, not with grief, but with the intoxicating certainty that their empire ruled both land and sea. But water was not the last stage Rome would claim. Soon the sand itself would become a theater for legend. When the Colosseum opened its gates in AD 80, executions had become theater. This amphitheater was no longer just a place for duels or hunts. It was a stage for myth, where the deaths of men and women echoed the legends of gods. The condemned were no longer just prisoners. They were cast in roles, forced to embody characters whose fates had been written long before their own names were forgotten. Martial, the poet who witnessed the inaugural games under Titus, recorded what he saw. A man dressed as Orpheus entered the arena with a lyre in hand. In myth, Orpheus could charm even the wildest beasts with music. But in the Colosseum, no melody could soften hunger. On cue, a bear lunged, tearing him apart before a roaring crowd. The story was inverted. Orpheus did not enchant. He perished, and the audience laughed at the irony. Elsewhere, a man played Daedalus, the great inventor who crafted wings of wax and feathers. He was displayed high above the sand, suspended in a cruel imitation of flight. Then, as the crowd watched, he fell. Not to the sea, as in legend, but to beasts waiting below. Martial captured the moment with cutting words. How you must wish you had your feathers now. Death was scripted, the agony tailored to match a tale. One of the most disturbing reenactments drew on the story of Pasiphae, the Cretan queen cursed with unnatural desire for a bull. In Rome's twisted version, a woman, or perhaps a man disguised as one, was thrown to an animal in front of the masses, their fate staged to echo myth. The crowd did not turn away. They leaned forward. Here, myth and punishment blurred until they were indistinguishable. Fire, too, was given its role. The condemned were wrapped in the tunica molesta, a garment soaked in pitch and set ablaze. Sometimes the act was framed as the trial of Mucius Scaevola, the Roman hero who had proven his loyalty by holding his hand in fire. But these men were not heroes. They were prisoners burned alive while the audience applauded their screams. Tertullian, writing years later, described such executions bitterly. Men, he said, were mocked as kindling, turned into torches for the entertainment of their peers. These performances were not about retelling stories. They were about reminding every spectator of Rome's absolute power. To reenact myth with real blood was to place the empire above the gods themselves. Legends that once warned or inspired were reduced to entertainment, their endings twisted into acts of control. The condemned were not merely executed. They were transformed into symbols, consumed by stories larger than themselves, their deaths swallowed by spectacle. The cruelty was in the detail. These deaths were choreographed, rehearsed, timed to heighten suspense. The crowd did not see justice. They saw ritual. They saw myth reborn through flesh and flame. The Colosseum was not a theater of imagination. It was a theater of erasure, where men and women lost their names and became echoes of characters who had never truly existed. And the effect was intoxicating. Each myth performed in blood gave the audience a taste of divine punishment, a catharsis twisted into spectacle. By watching others die as Orpheus, Daedalus, or Pasiphae, the Romans reassured themselves that their empire had become stronger than legend. Rome was not bound by the gods. Rome staged the gods, killed the gods, and laughed at them. The boundary between theater and execution collapsed completely. What once belonged to temples and storytellers now belonged to the amphitheater. The myths of Greece and Rome did not survive in marble or verse alone. They survived in screams, in the smell of burning flesh, in the applause of thousands who cheered as men and women played gods only to be destroyed. Rome's arenas were not just stone, were instruments of policy, forged not in marble alone, but in blood and fire. Every duel, every hunt, every staged myth carried a message. The empire ruled not only men, but death itself. What had begun as a funeral duty, a private offering for the dead, had grown into a machinery of control. The state learned quickly that spectacle was more powerful than decree. A law written on tablets could be ignored. A man torn apart by beasts in front of tens of thousands could not. With each spectacle, Rome inscribed its authority into the very fabric of its people. Families came to watch. Children grew up in the shadow of amphitheaters, their imaginations shaped not by bedtime stories, but by the roars of crowds and the sight of men dying in sand. Violence was normalized, ritualized, sanctified. To cheer was not only acceptable, it was expected. In this way, Rome turned cruelty into cohesion. The empire was bound not just by legions and laws, but by shared bloodlust. The Colosseum itself became a monument to this truth. Its arches towered over the city, its walls capable of holding more than 50,000 souls at once. Every seat was arranged by rank. Senators closest to the action, ordinary citizens higher up, slaves and women at the margins. In this theater, even seating reinforced hierarchy. You saw your place in the empire as clearly as you saw the sand below. The spectacles reminded not only who ruled, but where each person belonged. Politics was woven into the games. Emperors staged ever grander spectacles to prove generosity, to secure loyalty, to overshadow rivals. Bread was distributed, coin was scattered. Death became currency, bought and spent to purchase favor. When emperors faltered, the crowds demanded blood. When emperors thrived, they offered blood freely. The games were not distractions, as later critics claimed, were a dialogue, a negotiation of power written in flesh. Even philosophy bent beneath the weight of the arena. Seneca, watching the executions, confessed how the crowd corrupted him. He left more cruel, more ambitious, more inhuman, because he had been among human beings. His words revealed the paradox. Rome knew these spectacles degraded the soul, yet it depended on them. The arena was both poison and glue, weakening morals but binding society. It was not a flaw, it was the design. And what of those forced to die? They were erased even as they were displayed. Their names lost, their deaths consumed as entertainment. Archaeologists find their bones scarred by claws, their graves anonymous, their stories silent. The state made sure no memory survived. The condemned existed only in the moment of spectacle, then vanished, their identities absorbed into the glory of Rome. In this way, the empire achieved something chilling. It turned death into theater and erased the human being who suffered it. Yet the echoes remain. The ruins of the Colosseum still rise above Rome, their arches broken but enduring. Tourists walk the corridors where beasts once prowled and men once waited for death. They see empty seats, shattered stones, silent tunnels. But if you listen, the silence is heavy. It carries the weight of screams that were once drowned in applause. It carries the memory of a culture that measured power not in justice, but in performance. What does it say about us that we still marvel at these ruins? That we still romanticize gladiators, lions, and myths played out in blood? Perhaps because we sense a reflection. Rome's spectacles are gone, but the hunger for spectacle is not. We watch violence on screens. We cheer for conflict, dressed as entertainment. The amphitheater may have crumbled, but its lesson endures. Power thrives when cruelty is made into theater.